Delft in a bit of a strange room. As a teacher, I would like to have all my students in the group, but it's not easy to do in this room, of course. If I'm here, then you're sort of lost and the other way around. I am a biologist, as Jan said, but have been a computer programmer in the 80s and then a PhD student in production planning and met students, among others, in Delft. So I have been a regular visitor. I am still working in Wageningen though on complex adaptive systems or socio-technical systems, which we do a lot in the life sciences. So here you see some students in Wageningen, and they seem to be a jolly bunch of people, although of different colors. And I think that's what I was supposed to speak about. What happens if you have a classroom with students from different places? Next, around the corner is a classroom and a university with teachers from different places. That brings new challenges, because they will have different styles and so on. My first question is, do we still have until 12 o'clock, or do I have my 45 minutes? 45 minutes. Okay, so it'll be 12:10, ladies and gentlemen. And I see whether I can get this thing moving. Yes. Okay, so this is the program. I have first for you a little bit of introduction about university education with some figures about Delft. Now I know you're not all from Delft, but I happen to have been doing some or participating in some studies here about cross-cultural education. Then something about the goals of leaders across countries as imagined by MBA students from those countries. It is illustrative because the university boards of your universities and your teachers and especially international staff will mimic some of those goals, probably. Then something about levels of analysis. If we talk about culture, we're not talking about personality, we're not talking about character or individuals. Then we go on to the nitty-gritty, if you like, the background on culture, which I suppose many of you already are familiar with, so I'll be rather brief there. Then we'll go on to implications for culture of organization culture of universities in general, and then the effects of national culture in universities. And finally, that's when, if you're tired, you can slip away and wake up then, some practical tips for teachers. So here we go. Here are some results of a class of questions asked of teachers in Delft about the cross-cultural classroom a few years ago. And actually these answers reflect the stages of the cultural adaptation model of Bennett. The reference is below in the slide. Some of you may know that model. So you could be in denial. You just say culture is a bunch of bullshit, it's not real, and I don't have anything to do with it. Or you could say, well, it's not important in my situation. It really doesn't play a role here. This is about math or physics or whatever. Or you could say, well, yes, it's there, and it's actually really problematic, and it messes up my education. Or, and this is what Bennett of course likes, is you could say it's there and actually it's an enriching experience and we can all be the better for it. Supposedly you go through those stages as a person. I don't think it's the case for everybody. But you can pick your stage here, ladies and gentlemen. And also, of course, the stage of the people who are not here, but who maybe should have been here, your colleagues. This is something more about that survey, in this case for PhD students. So you see that the in-depth interview with PhD students in Delft from many places in the world reveal that they find it kind of difficult to find their place and to adapt. Why would that be? Well, in part you'll see it in my trip around culture. In the Netherlands, in general, in Delft in particular, we think that people will be able to find their own way. For instance, I arrived here, Suzanne was there, but there wasn't any special ceremony for me. If this had been Portugal, I would have had a proper reception at a special place with a group of intimae of the organization to pay due respect. I'm not saying that you should have done it here, but this is the kind of attitude in Delft. And if you are a person who's used to a very different culture, it can be confusing. But what am I supposed to do? Is this the place? What's happening? So these social cues are very small to the minds of many people who are not from here. Okay, you have also been able to look at this graph in the bottom of cultural shock and adaptation that typically people go through. You have a honeymoon stage, and then you have deception, and maybe it gets better later. We'll see how it goes with the USA. So, I have probably my device here. I need to point to the depth level. Thanks. Yeah. So, some remarks about English. It's a bit of a hobby horse of me. So you see here, there was criticism about the questionnaire, and then there was this student making big typos in a remark about the quality of the English of the teachers. I think both the students and the teachers in general need really good language skills. And one big problem is that non-Dutch students do not understand Dutch, while the Dutch students do. Okay, so this is an issue that the university needs to get to grips with, and it's not going to be fast. This needs to be a process. And I'm not saying that we cannot speak Dutch, or French, or German, which are languages that the Dutch used to be good at, in my generation, I'm 60, but it has gone away, which is very bad for culture and for trade. So, and by the way, English maybe is not going to be the hegemonic language for centuries, who knows? Yeah. Okay, this is another survey in the AB faculty in Delft with students. And here you see some remarks made by students showing, in my opinion, a big lack of idea about what culture actually is. Because culture is like the innermost part. Knowledge is the only thing that grows when sharing. I don't think so. Hatred, love, jealousy, any social phenomenon grows when sharing. But if you're a Delft engineer and you think about all kinds of physical properties, of course, knowledge is different. Knowledge actually belongs to the social domain. It is loaded with knowledge about the physical world, but it is a social phenomenon. Okay, so what else? I can't see my presentation, so that's why I keep turning my back at you. Yeah, but it won't help a lot. I mean, it will be worse. Okay. Cultural differences should make no difference. And of course, that is the thing in the diversity label of this day. We can just happily do what we used to do, but now we are from diverse places in the world. I do not think that is true. I think you should be your normal self and not be nervous about cultural differences, but they actually offer new possibilities as well. Although, in general, the best thing for a team is to have a purpose, which is one of the things why the Dream Team on hydrogen cars, I think, works so well. You have a purpose. Everybody loves that purpose. You want to be part of that. And this is also maybe what you were referring to in the question. Why is this good for the university? It's just something that will make people feel good about being in Delft. And who knows, it could lead to all kinds of innovations that get adopted more widely. So, that is the introduction about the world in Delft here. Let's go on to the nitty-gritty of culture. Here is this study I briefly mentioned, where MBA students from many countries were asked about what did they think were the golden line of the leaders from their country, to avoid the bias of political correctness, of course. That's why they did that. So here are the items that they mentioned. Growth of the company was the most mentioned item overall, and in this list, family interests was the least mentioned. and the others are in order of mention. Here are the scores of some of the economically important countries of today. By the way, you can imagine for yourself what the two presidential candidates of the USA most radiate. So USA, first goal, growth. Second goal, ethical norms. Third one, personal wealth. Fourth one, this year's profit. Fifth one, power. Germany, first one, Verantwortlichkeit. Für die Gemeinschaft. Second one, Verantwortlichkeit. Wieder, aber für meine Menschen, für meine Leute, for the employees. So responsibility is the first main thing in Germany, and so on. So that's how to read this. Nobody really loves the law, by the way. It's never the first item, but you still have to deal with it. So you can bet that if you have teachers, colleagues, or students from those countries, some of that value system they take with them. So the best thing to create a coherent team is to have a really good sense of purpose and community, but the unwritten rules how to do that can differ. Now about levels of analysis. We are very used in the West to think about individuals all the time. Diversity is about individuals being different from one another. I, as a population biologist and as a sort of population biologist of humans, I think that groups are far more important than most of us realize. Although teachers, probably many of you know that groups are important. You can have classes that have something going on in the group, and if that's right, then it's a good class. It's hard to pinpoint what it is, but it has to do with wanting to be part of that group. So this is the individual level. The groups, I call them here moral circles, because in a group everybody is held accountable, you could say, to the unwritten rules of that group. And if you don't obey them, then you may get punished. And if you are a foreigner, you don't know what the rules are. Imagine that you go to study in China and you have 100 Chinese students around you. I bet that in the first month there will be situations when you don't really know what you did wrong, but apparently you did something wrong and nobody can tell you. That is what non-Dutch students can also experience here. And a few of these things can be rather easily tackled. Many of them are more hard to tackle. Finally, we're all humans, and culture is actually rooted in this biological level. It has to do with our drive for belonging and for status, for being seen by people. So we form groups, and the more threatened we feel, the closer these groups need to be. And we have these echo chambers in Facebook if we feel that the world is a bad place. The safer the world, the less we need to lock ourselves in. Of course, there are proximate mechanisms, genes, hormones to do this, and our brains. But whether you know everything about hormones and genes doesn't really matter so much for knowing about people. Darwin knew nothing about genes. Doesn't mean his theory is no good. So you don't necessarily have to know everything about the details. Okay, so actually I'm going to talk a lot about the manifestations of the everybody level at the My Moral Circle level. And of course, if you deal with students, you also deal with individuals. They have their personality, they have their personal history. I'm not talking about it so much, but it is always there. Okay, that was the theory. It wasn't too bad, was it? No, sorry, it wasn't actually. We still have to do it. But I have a little diversion. Do you have these tickets with green, yellow, and red? Okay, so there are some stories about each of these 6 dimensions of culture. Now, who says, in all honesty, I've really never seen these 6 dimensions of culture before? Okay, if you have never seen them before, yeah, you can just raise your hand. Okay, so in that case, I will be very brief, and you will have to ask somebody who did not raise their hand now, and there are plenty of them. Okay, so you can do that during lunchtime. But I have a few stories that sort of hide things about culture. This is the first one. So I would like you to vote about this from your guts. Don't think about it too long. By using one of the 3 tickets. And you can look around the room to see their predominant color. So we see actually mostly green, but quite a bit of red and a few yellow. So most of you if somebody is silent, you would probably think this does not reflect on them so favorably. Where some think, well, maybe they were taught to be silent out of respect. So it could be, for those of you with the red tickets, that if you change the conditions, for instance, you stay after class and you talk about them in person, maybe then it would be easier. Right? I'm just taking you as a little example. Don't worry. It's not personal. The very fact of thinking back from something you see, some behavior of a student, to why might they be doing this, is the core of cross-cultural competency in a teacher. Why do they do this? Maybe they have different reasons than I would have had for that same behavior. Okay, here is the dimension of culture, the first one that I think informs the most probable response to that question we just had. So if you are from a country that's dark in color, you are likely to say, well, this person is shy or has nothing to say. If you are from a country that's entirely white, it means I have no data. But if it's light pink, then probably there are reasons why you wouldn't speak up as an individual in a group, because it's not the proper thing to do. Okay, and for instance, there are many Chinese students in Delft. You can see there's a big gap in color, there's a big gap in attitude towards these things. You might actually have some Chinese students who got the fact that you can speak up in class, but who overdo it. Because they don't have these unwritten rules of the game that sort of keep the Dutch within boundaries in their social behavior. So this is also a point where you can help your non-Dutch students. But don't do it in front of others, because this also means if you have a collectivistic group, you insult one person, you have actually insulted the whole group. So whenever you have a cross-cultural class, it's important not to do things that might destroy the atmosphere. I've done very bad things in the past myself, which is how I learned some of this. So here again we have the possible level of analysis confusions. Do you think that we have a growing tendency to individualism in the world today? I mean, this is not individualism. This is just autism or... you don't need to be from a certain culture to do it. Votes 2. You can go. So I would say here it's a pretty even split. Some people even lift more than one ticket because, which is actually very Dutch. And the Dutch can tend to say, wait a minute, this is too simple. And what if this, what if that? They really go say driving people from other places crazy. So, of course, this depends on many factors. Everybody used to call me by the first name when I was younger, and I still look younger than I am, so it still happens to be, but less and less with age. But typically, now what I do is I let everybody call them whatever they want to call me, as long as I have a gut feeling that they mean well, which is 99.99% of the time. And it usually can make people feel very uncomfortable if you you're 30 years older than they, and you try to force them to use your first name when they are really desperate to say sir or madam to you. And it has to do with this dimension of culture here. Countries that are dark, by the way, this is of course a gross simplification. Even within countries there are regional differences, and if you are from one of these countries you will know that, and they can be very strong. For instance, China is very diverse culturally, and I bet in Siberia you have very different places from the European side of Russia, but it's the big picture here. So the dark green countries is where status is very important, and there is a father-child relationship in any relationship, or mother-child. So people are looking for the asymmetry. Am I less than you in status or more? And if that is not taken seriously, then it perturbs them. On the other hand, if status is taken too seriously, it perturbs the people in the light green countries. And we are in the light green sector, though not as egalitarian as the Dutch think they are. Actually, there's more obedience, and you can see it in our political developments, than we like to admit. So here's a story about these two dimensions of culture. And you should read it from top left, going to right, then the middle line, and then the bottom line. And you see here a sort of performance interview, you could say. Or you could say a teacher-student relationship. And so you see the dog being called by the boss and being told to lie down. And the question now is, what is the culture of the dog, do you think? Who says this is an individualistic country, green, collectivistic, red? So it's the dog's culture. Individualistic, green, collectivistic, red. Okay, those of you with the red tickets, you may actually be confusing collectivism with power distance. The dog is obedient. That belongs to large power distance. It's easy to see. But the dog hates being obedient. If this was a dog with a collectivistic mindset, he would have taken this as a natural state of affairs. It doesn't. It's actually a French dog. This is a French cartoon. And in France, you have a combination of individualism and large power distance, which is why they're always in strike. Because unless they have larger groups together, they don't dare to say no, and the bosses are not listening before they go on strike. Which is one of the things also why KLM Air France will always be troublesome. Vote 3. I don't know whether it happened to you. It did happen to me. So you give all these 7s, 8s, maybe from 6.5 to 8, rarely outside that range. You get a student challenging you on that. Why will he never give me a 10? Okay, no green this time. Okay, so you don't say, well, actually a very bad report should have a 0, a very good one should have a 10, which I think there is something to say for that. A lot of yellow, so you're actually giving them the rules of the game again. And this would be the Calvinist response. I'm really oversimplifying, but and the red in this case is you're sort of blaming the person. Well, there are places where it would be very strange if you did not use the full range or give the full mark. Go to the USA, for instance. And here we have the dimension of culture that sort of correlates, although I'm really, again, oversimplifying because it's always more complex than that. But if you have countries with a dark red color, then typically a lot of status or high grades or whatever is given to some people or groups if they're collectivistic, and very little to others. So there's more diversity in scoring. If it's a light pink color, then you have the feminine cultures. We don't like that so much. Everybody should be more or less equal and equally rewarded. And there are many systems in the Dutch grading system to mitigate differences in quality. So between a student with a 6.5 and one with an 8, that could actually a very big difference in career perspective and intellectual capacity. Here you see this 6-dimensional space of culture. If you take 2 dimensions and place countries, then it gives you some possibilities to talk about certain things. In this case, if we take the first one, individualism, and the third one, femininity, masculinity, you can see that this is correlated with performance and how to reward people and what motivates them to perform. And you can imagine that if you have group work in your courses and you have students from other places, then they might implicitly have very different ideas about what is motivating. So you maybe need to do something with that. This is all from the Cultures and Organizations book, by the way. And I have to speed up a bit because otherwise I'll still be in trouble with Jan Leen. So here's the 4th dimension. So you have a good grade and you go, thank you, I'm so happy, thank you, thank you. disagreed and uncomfortable as well. Because it's something else to experience it. And I've been in very emotional and physical situations with students several times. Also, when I talk about culture, you can imagine it loosens up some emotions in people. So, but it's good that you seem to be taking this kind of thing on board as something that belongs to your life as a teacher. It could be somewhat related with your own anxieties. The probability that the student will do it is probably greater, but it depends on many other things too, in countries that are darker brown here, which are countries with higher anxiety on average in the culture. And it means you have to show more emotion in order to show that you mean things. So you get a different style. If you go to the countries that are light colored on this map, then being relaxed and being calm is important. You know, don't get excited or overexcited about things. But in the brown countries, really, if you have emotions, it shows that you are sincere. So there's a different style of acting and speaking in different places. Also, if you want to have appellation contrôlée and the food that grandma cooked, then the dark brown countries are probably good for that. If you want to eat from abroad, go to the light yellow countries. And here we see, I'm sure you know the basic needs and drives of people by Maslow. There is a certain correlation with these two images here. If you go to the masculine and more anxious cultures in the bottom right, safety is very important. You will see that in all kinds of regulation systems and in the attitude of people. If you go to the feminine side in the bottom, it's belonging to the group, which is where a teacher can be very influential. If you can be a caring father to your group, then that can make students feel so much better. They can be very lonely sometimes. Top left, we have the novelty thing. So this is where Delft also ranks high, and it should, of course. Within the Netherlands, by the way, there's a pretty strong gradient between Limburg and near the sea. If you go near the sea, you get nearer to the Danish model. And top right, you have achievement. Achievement is motivating. And it could be my own achievement, or I pick a hero. So rather than being jealous of a hero or belittling him, like we do with our king, for instance, they will venerate a hero in that's the top right-hand corner. Okay. Here two other dimensions, they are about the structure of organization. So large power distance and strong uncertainty avoidance, you have a pyramid. You always have to use the status path. You always have to go through the pyramid. If you don't have the authority to speak to somebody, you might as well not try. It's not going to be heard or taken seriously. Right, we go to the last two dimensions. Yeah, you can still do this. Okay, so good news. You just made a promotion. Yeah, nobody's going to dare to raise the red ticket. Because we're still in the Netherlands. But there would be places where if you did not show your new status, people would think you were crazy, and they would think there was something wrong with you, and you have to do it in order also to pay respect to the community that awarded you this new status. So actually, this is a rather big mind change to another person, to imagine that. It has to do with this dimension here, which is a bit confusing because I'm showing two studies that were done on the basis of very different data, but it turned out they found the same thing again, which we call here short-term versus long-term orientation. And short-term orientation means I am. And it's important who I am right now here. I will always be well-dressed, I will be snip-snap, and I will behave. If I meet you, I will be nice to you. Maybe we'll go for a drink, depends how, there's another dimension coming. But if I'm long-term oriented, I am preparing for the future. There's always more to do, and you are also, so I don't waste your time. And we are insignificant ants in a big, big colony that's striving to the future. So this is the difference, and you can see that the Arab world, but also USA and Anglo world are much more short-term oriented than the Germanic world and a lot of long-term oriented countries. People work harder, they study, they study, they study, and they study. Short-term oriented countries, people are. I am a monument of my own whatever. I'm proud to be this. You get the picture. So there are different ways of motivating people there too. Finally, the last of the dimensions. It's very hot. And no airco, old building. What do you do? Okay, so we see all the colors here. Not so many red people. Of course, you could think this is a trick question. He doesn't want us to give the red tickets. It depends very much on the local culture of that place. But for sure, it's usually better to err on the safe side, as they say. So I would probably, in most situations, dress formally as always. Although in Wageningen, formal would we say. Now we should not be picking on us so much, but we are not, because we're now part of the 4TU community with the other technical universities. So no longer any Mr. No. This has to do with the dimension of indulgence. Indulgence means life is good. And it also has to do with individualism, of course, and other things, and powerlessness. But indulgence means if you would like to do something, such as take your jacket off, you can, of course. Freedom. Freedom is the main word. So indulgent countries, Ireland, USA, Mexico, Ghana, Nigeria, all the Anglo world, actually, freedom is important. Also Saudi Arabia. It's not only for good things. Right? Why are there so many murders in the USA? Indulgence, freedom. Right? I think Clinton was trying to take the guns away from people. We're not having that. So, in a restraint, the opposite means people are not free. We are bound. We have duties to our community, to our parents. Life is hard, and people need more pharmacies. In the indulgent societies, they have more pubs. And you can see it on the streets. And this is also, so all these 6 dimensions are persistent traits of society. And in our universities, we have an amalgamate of all these different people. So you should not say Dutch students, international students. It's a wrong dichotomy. The only thing that unites the international students is they're not from here. But it's not a positive sameness. But what you can do is create a good community feeling and be there as a teacher. And you will be rewarded by the students. Okay, so this is connected with life outlook. It's different, but I think I should go on now and go to the conclusions. Ceux d'entre nous qui parlent français, vérité en deçà des Pyrénées, erreur au-delà. What's true on one side of the Pyrenees Mountains is wrong on the other. This is sort of the brief conclusion of the culture thing. Remember the values of managers also. And by the way, plus ça change, plus ça reste la même chose. More things change, more they show, they reveal the pattern that actually repeats itself. The less we know history, more we will repeat it unknowingly. Which is also a nice one. Finally, there's an Italian psychologist here that has this nice saying, which is about levels of analysis. We do not intend the consequences of our actions. We do things, voting for a certain person, things happen, we never wanted that to happen. So, that takes us to the tips for teachers. And we have a good 12, 13 minutes. This is the book that this knowledge was taken about. It's also about organization culture. And here you can use these 6 dimensions to think about the organization culture of your university. This was obtained not by comparing countries, but by comparing 20 different organizations across a few countries, the Netherlands and Denmark. So in your organization, is the process, the steps through which things go important, or is it the result? If you were in physics, you know that physical processes, the process really needs to be followed, or else you get different substances, and so you only get the result if you follow the process. Maybe if you want a student to pass a certain exam, well, you might close your eyes or find something creative to make sure that they succeed without necessarily following the process. But you might find some bureaucrat on your way who insist on process. So what is the culture in your organization? Second one, is the employee important, the people are important, or is the job important? Is it a 9-to-5 thing? Is it professional qualification? And you can see recently that professional qualifications have become very important, and all your managers need to stick to the rules, because otherwise their managers are going to complain to them, and that trickles down to more, let's say, job-oriented and less people-oriented atmosphere, but there are counter reactions as well. Third, well, actually, I may have been slightly contaminating these two. Parochial means we're a club, we're a community. Professional means we're physicists, we're mathematicians, we're professionals. And these are things that can be set in the early phases of an organization. You have a new dream team, you can actually, by your pioneer behavior, you can set the culture. Once it's formed, it's hard to change. If you become the teacher of a new course, you have a bit of freedom here. But if in a going concern, you have a little freedom. Okay, open versus closed. Do new people get accepted quickly? Of course, it needs to be rather open in a university, otherwise you are in trouble. Okay? So a closed culture for a university would be dysfunctional. So you can also partially use this in a normative way. There's a whole chapter in the book that explains it properly. Loose versus tight. This also has to do with the shorts issue. So are the regulations followed strictly? Is everybody on time? And that kind of thing. So sort of ritualistic adherence to strictness. And finally, is there one truth? Well, this is what science is all about. So probably you will find a rather normative attitudes among people. But if you're an engineer, you might be more pragmatic. There's this joke, it works in theory, but doesn't work in practice. Sorry, it works in practice, but doesn't work in theory. Okay. So, now on to national culture at universities. Can you guess the top photo where it was taken? In which country? It's Oudboy in Denmark. And the bottom one, it actually says where it is. It's Saudi Arabia. So you can see that the architecture is very different. The height of buildings correlates very well with power distance of the culture, and also a little bit with indulgence, but mainly power distance. So the culture in a university will inherit a lot from the country culture, as you can imagine. There could be a very big gap between universities. In the Netherlands, we don't like big gaps. We saw it in the grading thing, which means that all our universities are about as good. And if it wasn't the case, we would start to worry and try to change it. But in many places in the world, that is very different. And the word university can hide very, very different things. Colleagues bring their own cultures too. If you are from a large power distance and collectivist country, you have a pyramid, you have a very hierarchical and group-based logic. You don't want people to speak up and to make a noise that destroys the harmony. If you have bosses who are immigrants, you might know this from first-hand practice. Content versus process. In uncertainty tolerant societies, such as Anglo societies, process is deemed very important. Uncertainty avoiding societies, French or Latin, content. So you teach different things. And also, there have been tests that books translated from those languages mutually are deemed less good by the other language. And they say this is not scientific. Actually, I wrote one chapter in the culture book on the evolution of culture. It was refused by the Italians. They didn't want it. And also by the French, because it's supposed to be unscientific. But the reason I heard is that teachers of business subjects will feel uncomfortable because they get questions they cannot answer. Whereas in an Anglo environment, big theory is good. The bigger and the vaguer, the better. So, accountability, of course, if you are a teacher from a large power distance country, you don't want your students to be able to hold you accountable. I mean, you will be benevolent, more than a Dutch professor, but you don't want to be accountable. It needs to be a relational thing. And grading, we talked about that already. So, now for the practical tips. First, in classrooms. And I think many of the things I have more or less already said. So if you are in a cross-cultural classroom, remember what role you have and keep playing that role, especially in the plenary situation. You may also have experienced in, maybe if you, for instance, have been in Russia, a formal situation is very different from an informal one. That is the case in cross-cultural classrooms. So be in role. During the break, however, people can come up with all the things that they know it's not proper for them to say during the class. So if you are there in the break, people will come up to you and they will ask questions that you can then use. You can ask them, is it okay if I repeat this question in class? Or you could do it without mentioning the student. That is something for you to decide. And so basically you get what you give. If you take a personal interest, you will get much more back. Beware of Dunglish also. Be critical about that. And really, we have a long way to go. Okay, for instance, some do's here. This is again, if you see or hear something, try to track back. What could be the intention behind this? This is often hard to do on the spot, but you can do it after the fact. If something happened in class that you don't quite understand. And there are probably people you can talk about it with at your university. For instance, here are some of the things that I lived through myself. There was this Chinese student who was talking about a pleasant situation, and I didn't understand what was so pleasant. Of course, it was the present situation. And the whole class had misunderstood, so it was good that we clarified. So if you have a student who speaks in a way that you cannot understand, just take your time, don't be in a hurry, and ask for clarification. You can vet that the others, or part of the others, are not understanding as well. And it should not be something painful, but just pragmatic, and most people will appreciate it. I have worked hardly. You know, adverbs get lead in English, but not all of them. You are like a father to me. This was a Ghanaian student telling me this. Now, if this had been a Dutch student, I would have said, "Gadverdamme, ben je vader helemaal niet." But in this case, he just meant to say, "You've been very nice to me." And so I took it as a compliment. I love teachers because they are so lovely. This was part of a letter sent to me by a Chinese female student at Christmas time, who was afraid that she might fail her re-exam. So this was a Chinese way of sort of sweet-talking the teacher, and she didn't really mean what it would have meant if a Dutch student had written this card. So you have to interpret, to sort of go back from what is said to what they could have been intending from their point of view. Pleasing teachers in a large power distance situation is always a good idea for students. And being pleased, letting yourself be pleased, and acknowledging that they are respectful and pleasant is very important. Okay, and finally, how they call you, well, I told you already that it's better to let that free. Don't force them. Okay, don't overestimate your own English. I make mistakes myself, but it can be a lot worse. So I hear many people say there are variables in the model. It's variables, guys, and if people are not Dutch, they might not understand it. And parameters and perimeters. 3 numbers, no, 3 digits. I don't oversee anything. Overseeing can be looking over it so you don't see it. And a thrusted third party, I like that one a lot. I hate you all, very welcome. I actually really did hear that one in a large conference. Please sit on the table. Also very nice. And I will teach less people. Okay, I'm stopping. Less and fewer is also a very difficult distinction. So many people actually can use improvement on their English. Will probably feel better. Although it could sometimes work against them. And I also know that in some places groups already have a bad reputation. So you might be up against that. For me it works well. But you have to monitor the beginning. Een goed begin is het halve werk. And so, in the beginning of a group's life, when they need to formulate a plan or so, you have to be there and see what's going on in that team, and you might be able to discreetly steer them. What you should not have is the situation on the top here. These pictures where somehow you have a division in the team. What you want, and we're still in the Netherlands of course, is a team like on the bottom right where there is diversity without subgroups. If you have categories or groups within the team that don't communicate or that somehow label one another as the outsiders, then you might be in trouble. But if you let them choose themselves, you probably will not get teams that have that phenomenon. There is sometimes an ideology that we need to mix everybody. Some situations you might want to do that, but it's not necessarily a good idea in classes. If it's an introduction to the university, I suppose mixing is a good strategy. But if it's a course, maybe not. But it depends on the situation. Okay, then finally something about feedback. If you are a Dutch teacher or an Anglo teacher, you are individualistic in your mindset, you give feedback to people from more collectivistic countries, which is basically the rest of the world, then here are some rules. Basically, if you want to crack a hard nut, don't do it face to face. And you might want to be indirect about it in order not to create so much ill will that you're only destroying what you want to create. Okay. Also, know their place, and you should be very clear in speaking and writing and investing in better, also drama skills can be very useful for a teacher. Assignments, this is one thing that I'm not very strong on. I have a tendency to assume that students will be creative about the assignments. But if I have students from hierarchical and certainly avoiding cultures, frequently they want more directions. So I have to at least say, guys, this is what I'm going to give you in terms of directions. The rest, you should figure out for yourself. If you have any questions, you can come to me. That would be enough to make them feel better. Finally, okay, so hanging around after class can be a really good way to resolve the issues that haven't been resolved so far. So I'll be hanging around during lunch. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this inspiring talk. Maybe one urgent question that is relevant for all of us. No, nobody cares now. I'm afraid you will get